appreciate you. And if you're new here and you enjoy whispered true crime, please consider subscribing to the channel. I post 2 times a week, on Monday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I recommend using headphones if you would like to hear the gentle mic brushing. Alright, let's get into tonight's case. Tonight we are traveling to Massachusetts. Shout out to all my friends in Massachusetts. This case occurred in 1988, and it is the case of Sharon, Gregory, and Mark Branch. So let's start with some information on Sharon Gregory. She and her twin sister Sharon were born on March 26, 1970. They were raised by their parents in Greenfield, Massachusetts. Now, I don't have a lot of information on her childhood, unfortunately. But in the fall of 1988, Sharon was 18. She was living with her family, with her parents and her twin sister Cheryl, in their family home in Greenfield still. And she was a freshman at Greenfield Community College. She had a boyfriend and an active social life. The kind of social life that you would expect a freshman in college to have. She had a nice group of friends, and one of her friends was a guy named Scott Landry. He was someone that she actually knew from high school. Now, he was friends with a guy named Mark Branch. Mark Branch also went to their same high school for a time, but he had ultimately graduated from a different school. So Sharon didn't know him from school, she just knew him through Scott. So you would say that they were acquaintances, and they wound up being together quite a bit because they traveled in the same social circle. So let's take a step back and talk about Mark Branch. He was raised by his parents, also in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and he suffered from pretty serious chronic mental health problems since he was a little child. So he had always been receiving some kind of psychological treatment from early on. Now, in school, he was said to be extremely awkward, and he could not relate to his peers very well. He was often teased and bullied, and not many people wanted to be his friend, so he turned into a bit of a loner. But ultimately, he did manage to make a handful of friends, one of whom was Scott Landry, the guy I mentioned before. So anyway, all of Mark's friends knew that he was extremely into horror movies and everything that had to do with them, and gore and all that. And he was known obsessed with Jason Voorhees starting in 2nd grade. And as time progressed, he became more and more obsessed with that character. Now, if you never heard of Jason Voorhees, he is from the movie Friday the 13th. He is the villain who wears a hockey mask. So, that was Mark's favorite movie, and he really looked up to Jason in a big way. And he collected tons and tons of memorabilia from popular horror movies. He kept it all in his room. His bedroom was just loaded with the stuff. He had supposedly 7 hockey masks. Now, he didn't play hockey. They were all about Friday the 13th. He had tons of VHS tapes, because remember, it was the 80s. He had posters all over his walls from these movies. He had dolls. And he even had weapons. The weapons that the villains would use in the movies. Mark openly talked to his friends about his desire to kill someone someday. He would go into great detail about this fantasy. He would talk about when, where, and how he would do it. He even had made a list of several girls from his school. And the girls on the list each had a written file that he would keep in his bedroom. The file would have details about these girls. And then he would call their home numbers, and he would make obscene phone calls. And he would tell them that he was going to kill them. And he would share some personal information that he knew about them to make it even scarier. That's why he had those files, supposedly. So he could look at the file and say, oh, I know that at 10 o'clock you have dance class, something like that, you know. Anyway, he would also send them notes, threatening notes. So, of course, the girls reported this to the school. The school called in Mark's parents and reported what was going on. And Mark's parents were horrified, of course. They were trying their best to keep his mental health in check. You know, they were taking him for treatment, doing whatever they could. So at that time, they decided they would transfer him to a private school to give him a fresh start. It was actually 1984 when they sent him to New Salem Academy. And they hoped that the new setting would change things for him. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. He continued on with the same exact problematic behavior as before. Supposedly, there was a girl who tried to befriend him. You know, she noticed that he was new and he didn't know anyone, and she was friendly to him. So, to pay her back for her kindness, he started making threats to kill her, and one day, he got a photo of her, he pinned it up to her locker, and he shoved a scalpel into the middle of the photo. At that time, a decision was made to send him to an inpatient psychiatric hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts, where he stayed for an entire year. And then, I guess when they figured he was stable enough, they sent him to a special school. It was a residential school for children with behavioral and emotional problems. And friendships with the kids that he knew from school, from public school, such as Scott Landry. And he had not changed a bit. He continued to talk to these friends about his desire to kill, and about all the horror movies and all this violence and gore and everything like that. He even told his friends a story about how on Halloween in 1987, he had dressed up in his Jason Voorhees costume, and he brought along a knife. He went to the local middle school and he hid in the darkness waiting for a girl to walk by, and eventually one did. So he jumped out of the darkness at her in his Jason costume and he started chasing her with his knife, trying to kill her. Luckily, he tripped and fell, and she got away. He never actually physically contacted her, according to his story. And he said that if he had caught up with her, he would have killed her. Now the thing about this is either it was never reported, or the report never went anywhere because nobody knew who it was, or it never happened at all. I don't really know which of the three it is. But nothing came of that, so he had told his friends that this year, which was 1988, he was going to try again on Halloween, and he was going to kill someone on Halloween. Sometimes when Mark hung out with his friends, Cheryl and Sharon were there as well with their boyfriends, so they were well aware of his desire to kill, and they knew about this attempted murder on this girl in 1987. And they thought he was a pretty creepy guy. Now, in August of 1988, the friends were hanging out as usual, and for some reason Mark brought with him his psychological profile that he had gotten at the hospital, and he was sharing it with everyone. And Cheryl, not Sharon, but the story goes that Cheryl asked him if she could take it home because she was very interested in it and she wanted to read it more closely. And he said, sure, just burn it when you are done. So she agreed, and she took it home. She did not burn it. She cut off his name, so there would be no identifying information on it, and she kept it. And it is believed that one of the two girls used this profile to write a paper for psychology class. On October 22nd, 1988, so about 2 months after Cheryl took home the profile, Scott called the Gregory house, the house of Cheryl and Sharon. Sharon answered the phone, and he asked if Cheryl still has the psychological profile. And Sharon said yes, her sister still has it, and it is lying on her bedroom floor. That is where it had been for a couple of months, just laying on the floor. So Scott said, all right, well, Mark wants it back. Okay, so you guys got to get it back to him. She said, okay. Now, 2 days later, October 24th, the Gregory parents left for work in the morning as normal. Cheryl left at 8:45 a.m. for her college class. When she left, Sharon was just getting out of the shower. She had a class as well, but it was a little bit later. So Cheryl left and she didn't lock the door. On that same morning, Mark had an 8:15 appointment with his counselor at the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Center. And his car was having trouble. The air conditioner wasn't working and he was low her car is broken and there's nobody home to take her to school, blah, 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 whatever. So, Mark suddenly decided he had to go. He said, "Can you bring me back to my house now, because I'm gonna take my car and go to Stop and Shop. I gotta pick up my paycheck." So Scott said, "No problem." He drove Mark back to his house, and Scott went back home. Meanwhile, Mark did not go to Stop and Shop. He went in his house. He went up to his bedroom. He put on his Jason outfit, and he grabbed a knife. And then he headed over to the Gregory house. He parked in front of their house. He was driving a gray Chevy Chevette. Later, the neighbor would report having seen this Chevy park at the house at about noon, and a young man walked out dressed in jeans, and he had dark hair. He was about 6 feet tall and about 180 pounds. And he saw the guy go in the house at 12, and they saw the guy come back out again about 5 minutes later. So apparently, what is believed to have taken place was that Mark opened the front door because it was not locked. He put on his Jason mask. He confronted Sharon. He chased her with his knife. She ran up the stairs and into the upstairs bathroom, where he stabbed her to death. Then he put her into the bathtub and left. So now, around 12:30 p.m., just a few minutes later basically, Sharon's twin sister, Cheryl, got home from school. She walked in the front door and she saw a puddle of blood. She saw bloody footprints going up the stairs, and the trail of blood brought her right into the upstairs bathroom, where she was horrified to find her sister covered in blood and dead. And there was so much blood that Cheryl assumed that Sharon had taken her own life. She couldn't see what was under the blood. So she called the police, who came right over, and they took one look and they said, "Oh no, she did not take her life. This is a homicide." She had been stabbed all over, and her throat had been slit. She had bled to death. She had been stabbed at least 24 times. So they asked Cheryl, "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" And her first thought was Mark. She said Mark was extremely creepy, and her sister had told her that she found him to be creepy and that he looked at her in a very funny way. She did not know Mark's last name, actually, but she knew where he lived. So she went in the police car and she led them to his house. Once they got to the Branch house, the police went up and rang the bell, and Mark's mother came to the door. She said he was not home, and the last time she saw him was that morning, when he had left to go to his counseling appointment with Scott. So they went to talk to Scott Landry, and he told them everything that he knew. Scott told the police the details of that morning. He also said that Mark was angry with the Gregory twins because he felt that they were always making fun of him, and that they had even taken his photo. As it turns out, 2 photos of Mark were found in Sharon's bedroom. And Scott went on to say suspect. The police got a warrant to search Mark's house, and they searched his room and they found his huge collection of memorabilia. They found all those weapons, and they also found 75 slasher films, 64 killer-related books, 3 knives, a machete, and 3 goalie masks. It was a lot of stuff. They said that pretty much that was all he had, with the exception of like his basic personal items, like, you know, his regular everyday clothes. Otherwise, the room was completely dedicated to horror. So, with this information, the whole town and the media went nuts. They were afraid that a crazed Jason lookalike was out there roaming the town looking to kill again. A lot of people blamed the movie Friday the 13th for what he did, as if the movie gave him the idea to do this, that he never would have done this if it weren't for the movie. And satanic panic was in full effect, because this was the 80s, and that is the time when satanic panic was a big thing. Now, everywhere people looked, they seemed to think that they saw Mark Branch. There were 3,000 reports of sightings. And with Halloween coming up, people were extremely afraid. You know, he could be out there wearing a costume. You wouldn't know it was him. It could be any kind of costume, you know. So the town decided to cancel their Halloween parade, and they said children can only go trick-or-treating during the daylight. That was the rule. It just wasn't safe. And meanwhile, they were not finding Mark. So the police hired a psychic. His name was John Monty. He was known to have been successful in the past with other predictions. For example, he had predicted that Ronald Reagan would be shot in the way that he was shot. So, now, they contacted him pretty early on, so it was before the story really got out there. So he didn't know anything about the situation, but they gave him a photo of Sharon. And they gave him no other information, no names, no details, nothing. He said that immediately he started hearing the name Jason in his head, and he was envisioning lots of violence. He led them to an abandoned slaughterhouse that was near where Mark's car had been found. Now, this slaughterhouse was a place that the police did not even know existed. And when they looked inside, the walls were covered with graffiti that was all related to horror. Like it said 666, and like Freddy was here. And the oddest thing was there was a stick figure drawing of a girl running up some stairs being chased by a guy in a mask who had a knife, which seems like that might be exactly what Mark had done. So they're thinking, you know, he drew that here, and he must be somewhere around here. So they started looking around the slaughterhouse. They looked as hard as they could, but they could not find him. So, at this time, lots and lots of hunters, vigilante hunters, went to those same woods to try to find Mark themselves. And they didn't. But about a month later, it was November 29th, 1988, a deer hunter named Kevin accidentally found Mark hanging from a tree by his shoelaces and his belt. And he was dressed up in his Jason costume with his mask. He had taken his life. He was only a mile from where his car was found. And the coroner determined that he had likely died on the same day as the murder, so he had been there, hanging there for over a month. And that is the case. What are your thoughts? I will share some of mine. First of all, rest in peace to Sharon. She was only 18. She was just starting her life when this horrible, horrible murder occurred, and I can't even imagine how scared she must have been. And of course, my heart goes out to her twin sister, Cheryl. Not only did she lose her sister in this way, but she was the one who found her body. I'm not sure whatever became of her. I tried to find her on the internet, but I couldn't. And of course, my heart goes out to their parents and the rest of their family and friends. So, of course, we're all wondering, what was the motive? Was it just that he wanted to kill someone, like he said? Could be. And it was just, good opportunity because he knew she was home alone. She was an easy target. Or was it that he was very angry with her because, like he said, the girls were teasing him, he felt, had taken his photo? Was that why? Or was it because they had kept his psychological profile? Or did he hear that one of them had written a paper for college about him? Maybe. Maybe it's a whole combination of these things. I'm thinking, I think he wanted to kill someone, as he had been saying. He heard that she was home alone. And he must have been thinking, I'm not too thrilled with her for what she's done, so she's gonna be the one. That's what I think. What do you think, though? The next thing a lot of people want to know is, why didn't his friends say anything? When he said that he wanted to kill someone on Halloween, or when he said he had tried to kill someone, why didn't they tell anyone? Well, don't forget, it was a different time. People weren't as sensitive to that kind of stuff back then. There weren't any school shooters, or not many. It wasn't like a big thing on people's minds. And, they weren't constantly hearing about crazy violence. Not that it wasn't happening, but just that, there was no internet. You just got your local news, basically, and whatever giant story was breaking in the world. But you didn't know about every little thing everywhere. So his friends probably heard it and they just thought, oh, that guy, he's nuts, whatever, he's not gonna do it. He's been talking about this stuff for years, he never did it yet. And they probably didn't really believe the story about the girl, the year before. So I'm thinking, it's not, I wouldn't blame them too heavily for not speaking up. And they also knew that he was already in treatment, so they might have figured, whatever's wrong with him, his psychiatrist is going to take care of it anyway, and maybe his counselor already knows all the things he's telling us. This is just what I'm thinking. I don't know. Nowadays we say if you hear anything, it just worked out that way because he found out that she was home alone, So when he went to the counseling session, it wasn't on his mind that he was going to do that. But anyway, I feel terribly for that counselor, because that counselor must blame him or herself tremendously. But I don't blame the counselor. The thing about psychiatry is there are no tests that will tell you what someone is going to do. There is no blood test, there is no CAT scan. Everything that you know as a counselor or as a psychiatrist or a therapist, everything you know is based on what you can see, what you can observe, and what you've been told. So, it's not an exact science. If he would have gone in that day and said, I'm feeling like killing someone, I'm having homicidal ideations, they would have hospitalized him. So, if he did not lead on with his behavior or what he was saying, then the counselor would not have assumed that anything was going to happen. And according to the way the story unfolds, it doesn't seem that he was psychotic either. He was functioning as he normally did throughout that day. So sometimes it is almost impossible to predict what might happen, which is very, very sad. Alright, well, I am going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found it to be thought-provoking. I look